And Ruben, I'm waiting for your word.
Yes, Mayor Ortiz, you may begin.
Very good. Welcome, everybody. Beautiful day in Burlingame. Today, we are having our annual joint meeting of the City Council and Planning Commission, Saturday, April 23rd. And with that, we can have a roll call, please.
Let's see, Councilmember Beach.
Present.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Present.
Councilmember Colson.
Present.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Here.
And Mayor Ortiz.
Present.
And then from the Planning Commission, Planning Commissioner Say.
Here.
Commissioner Camarado.
Present.
Commissioner Gall.
Here.
Commissioner Foth.
Here.
And Chair Schmidt.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, we do have two outgoing planning commissioners that are not joining us today. Just want to say a very special thank you to both of them, to Commissioner Loftus and Commissioner Terrones for all their hard work and their many years of service. So thank you. And then our two new commissioners were not able to join us today, but I think it's a good thought for that the council member O'Brien brought up to have them watch the recording. So with that, we will move on to item number 4, public comments. This is for items that are not on the agenda. So Mr. Hearn.
Sure, and before I do that, let me just share with the public on how to participate today. So for all in attendance today, please note that this meeting is being held using the Zoom webinar format. So you will see that council members, planning commissioners, and staff are panelists. Please note there are several ways to submit comments during the meeting. You may raise your hand in Zoom by clicking on the raise hand button located at the bottom of your screen. Members of the public who are participating in the Zoom webinar by phone can dial *9 to raise a hand. You may also send your comments by email to publiccomment@burlingame.org. Staff will be monitoring emails submitted during the meeting, which will be read at the appropriate time. The length of the emailed comment should be commensurate with the 3 minutes customarily allowed for verbal comments. If you are an applicant or an applicant's representative who's going to speak on one of the items later this morning, you will be asked to raise your hand when your agenda item is up for discussion so that we may be prepared for you to speak at the appropriate time. We ask that you turn on your video at that time so we can have more clear communication, simulating the experience we would have if we were meeting in person. This meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be updated to the city's website after the meeting. So yes, moving on to public comment, non-agenda. Members of the public may speak about any item not on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to suggest an item for a future council or planning commission agenda may do so during the public comment period. The Ralph M. Brown Act, the state local agency local open meeting law, prohibits the City Council and Planning Commission from acting on any matter that is not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. The mayor may adjust the time limit in light of the number of anticipated speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hearn. And I noticed I did skip over one of the items that was on the agenda. So that is a meeting overview. Mr. Gardner, is there something that you, yes, please go ahead.
Yep, quite all right. Just to welcome Mayor Ortiz, members of the council, Chair Schmidt, members of the Planning Commission. This is our annual joint meeting of the City Council and Planning Commission. Today's agenda has 2 items. The first is the overview of an application on the Bayfront for a new office life science proposal. And the second is a overview of the housing element update, and in particular, the public participation that we have been carrying out this year. So we welcome everybody. Appreciate you all joining us this morning and look forward to sharing these items with you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. And then we're going to move right on to the items of 5A. And so I'm going to pass it back, but just first, I'm passing it back to Kevin Gardner, who's our Community Development Director, and Ruben Huron, who is our Planning Manager. So gentlemen, you have the command.
Kevin, if I can interrupt, it looks like we have a member of the public that wishes to speak on the non-agenda public comments. So let me bring that person in. They are by phone, so see if I can bring them in. Okay, caller, if you can unmute yourself, you may speak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Honorable members of the council and mayor, my name is Jim Lawrence. I am the chair, board of directors, Fixing San Mateo County. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, and our mission is to enact a civilian oversight board and Inspector General's office for our San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. Moreover, we strongly recommend that the Board of Supervisors use their legislative authority via Assembly Bill 1185 to install this civilian oversight board and Inspector General's office for our San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. With the installation of this oversight board, we, the general public, will gain transparency into this vital county governmental office for which we invest annually $300 million of taxpayers' funds, and more importantly, to begin to build community trust of those who were given the right to enforce our laws and ensure fair and impartial treatment for all San Mateo County residents. It is common sense, good government, and fiscally responsible to have transparency and accountability for our tax dollars. On behalf of Fixing San Mateo County, we're asking all city leaders to join us in requesting the Board of Supervisors install this office. Further details on this very important matter have been emailed to each of you, and my contact details are there also included to address any questions or concerns you may have. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Mr. Hearn, do you have any other public comment?
Looks like that's it. Let me check the email, make sure nothing has come in, and I don't see anything come in through the public comment email, so we can move forward.
Very good. Okay, so then back to item number 5A. I'll pass it on to our Community Development Director.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
May I have the floor for just a moment?
Yes, please, of course, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am recusing myself from item 5A based on a potential conflict of interest. I was unaware that my husband's law firm, not my husband, but the firm is representing one of the developers on this project. So as a result, I'm seeking an FPPC opinion, but out of an abundance of caution, I am recusing from this item. And so in coordination with the city attorney, what I need to do is completely leave the meeting and depart entirely. So I will be off Zoom, but then the city manager or the city attorney will text me when this item is over, and I will return for item 5B. Thank you, Mr.
Very, very good. Thank you, Councilmember Beach. And we will miss you in the discussion, but understood. Okay, now back to our Community Development Director.
Unmute, there we go. So thank you, Mayor Ortiz and members of the council and planning commission. Apologize if you hear some dogs barking in the background. It's Saturday morning here. Anyways, we're delighted to be able to present the application or have the applicants for the presentation for the application at 1200 1340 Old Bayshore Highway share their presentation with you all. I think some of you may have seen versions of this presentation and others maybe haven't. So this is an opportunity for everybody to see the same information. I think what's interesting with this project, it's one of several on the Bayfront and focuses on office and life science. This one has some interesting features, including adaptation to sea level rise in response to the guidelines that were in our recently adopted zoning ordinance. And then it also has some community benefits, which hopefully the community will find beneficial. One kind of Brown Act note is this application will be coming to both the council and the planning commission in the future. So you can provide some feedback and ask questions today, but we would ask that you hold back on indicating which way you may go in terms of making any sort of determinations or actions on the application. But with that said, it is a great opportunity to see it, ask some questions, and provide some initial reactions. So with that, I think we will bring in the applicants. They have a presentation prepared, and I see them raising their hands. So Ruben will bring them in as panelists, the way we do with our other public meetings. While we wait, I'll also note that there was a letter received, sent to the Planning Commission and the City Council from the General Manager of the Hyatt Regency across the street. So I think you would have all found that in your inbox. If not, just to note for the record that a letter of support for this application was submitted from that manager.
Through the mayor, to the director, I just wanted to let you know that actually one of the planning commissioners, future planning commissioners, Chris Haran, is on the call. So I just want to acknowledge that he was on the call.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. So without further ado, we have Virginia Calkins from DivCo West, and I believe Virginia will be leading the presentation and possibly including others. So I will hand it over to Virginia Calkins.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning. I'm going to share my screen. That's allowed. Is it disabled, screen sharing?
Ruben, I think, can you just change the setting?
Yeah. There we go.
I
Okay,
could
give
try
it a try.
acting it out, but
Try it again, Virginia. I just changed the setting.
okay, perfect. Okay, great. Good morning, Mayor Ortiz, council members, planning commissioners, members of the public. My name is Virginia Calkins, and I'm a senior development manager with DivCo West. With me here this morning is Seth Bland, director of development at DivCo, and Kirk Syme, founder of Woodstock Development, our partner on the project. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about our proposed project, Peninsula Crossing. I'll start with a quick background of who we are. DivCo West is a national real estate company founded nearly 30 years ago here in the Bay Area and now active in the country's primary innovation markets. We engage in ground-up development nationwide. Most notably, we are developing Cambridge Crossing, a 45-acre, 4.5 million square foot transit-oriented neighborhood on a former industrial brownfield site in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Still in progress, Cambridge Crossing is already home to major life science companies, including Bristol-Myers Squibb, Sanofi, and Philips. We wanted to find a location in the Bay Area for a similarly ambitious bioscience development. Over the course of years, we assembled through a series of acquisitions a 12-acre bayfront parcel here in Burlingame. We then gathered one of the most experienced consultant teams to help us implement Burlingame's vision for the bayfront. We're excited to be here today to present the proposed project. Our goal for Peninsula Crossing is to set the standard for development in Burlingame and the broader Peninsula region, and to fulfill Burlingame's general plan aspirations for the bayfront. We plan to deliver a broad range of benefits to the city and the community, ranging from completion of the Bay Trail to economic development, from sea level rise protection to placemaking. One of the key and unique benefits of Peninsula Crossing is the completion of the Bay Trail. The site is one of the few areas in the region where the Bay Trail just stops. There's over a quarter-mile gap lacking any trail at all. When we visit the site today, we inevitably see hotel guests wandering parking lots looking for a path. This vital stretch of Bay Trail will connect Burlingame to the broader regional trail network, exceeding 100 miles of trails. In addition to the Bay Trail itself, we are proposing a site-wide trail system, providing ways for pedestrians to easily access the bay from Old Bayshore Highway and Airport Boulevard. Visitors and residents can walk and cycle north and south along the shore, while boardwalks will allow people to slow down and interact with the natural waters. The trail will be multimodal, designed to safely accommodate biking, walking, and jogging. And while the trail is a central focus of our site recreation, it only represents one element. The second category of community benefits, Peninsula Crossing, is public recreation. We aim to build upon the Burlingame Parks and Rec Master Plan and complement the already robust recreational opportunities in the area. We'll be part of a network of parks, with the Bay Trail connecting the open space of Peninsula Crossing to baseball fields across the street and other recreational spaces along the bay. The Peninsula Crossing landscape includes nearly 4 acres of lush public open space. Exercise zones, play areas, and picnic groves dot the site, creating opportunities for enjoyment across a wide diversity of people and ages. Other areas of the site, rich with plantings, provide calmer moments, including a series of vista points to take in view of the creek, the bay, wildlife, or landing airplanes. A public plaza at the south becomes a welcome point to the bayfront, connecting the site to the recently improved pedestrian overpass. The plaza is designed to support varied programming, such as food trucks, art installations, or farm stands. It includes electrical outlets, bike racks, and a water fountain. The Bay Trail here encircles a restored tidal wetland, an improved native ecosystem, home to fish and birds. The south building includes a public cafe with outdoor seating spilling out onto a patio to support a dynamic and engaging waterfront. Integrated terrace seating could accommodate nature-based field trips, small concerts, or other community events. While the site prioritizes public transit, pedestrian, and bike connectivity, the south parking garage also includes 40 dedicated public parking spaces to ensure accessibility. Peninsula Crossing has a major focus on supporting efficient and sustainable transportation for the city of Burlingame. We emphasize transit, bike, and pedestrian connectivity to reduce single occupancy vehicle traffic. The site is walking distance to the Broadway Caltrain station. Additionally, we are committed to funding a commute.org shuttle, which will provide free public rides to Millbrae Caltrain and BART station every 15 minutes from the site. It's also notable that employees who do drive to the site will have convenient access on and off 101, minimizing the potential impact of the project on Burlingame streets and neighborhoods. This is a view of Old Bayshore Highway with a new shuttle stop and dedicated bike lane along the project frontage. We are planning significant investment in new sidewalks, protected bike lanes, crosswalks, and intersection improvements to increase pedestrian and cyclist safety. Peninsula Crossing will reintroduce nature to the bayfront, turning old, abandoned parking lots into valuable habitat. The new living shoreline is made of natural materials and a drought-resistant plant palette. The site will require minimal irrigation at stabilization and will utilize a reclaimed water system. The planting scheme itself serves multiple purposes, simultaneously stabilizing the shore and provided meeting habitat. A framework of 230 new trees is laid out to create comfortable microclimates that take into account wind and shadow. We take bird safe design very seriously. We've engaged an ornithologist to provide strict design standards and review the project in detail. We plan to apply bird frit and other treatments to the curtain wall to make it appear opaque or patterned to flying birds. Easton Creek today is a dilapidated, dirty drainage channel collecting garbage. We plan to transform the creek into a nature corridor, connecting the bayfront to the city of Burlingame with layers of plant habitat and meandering trails. We first brought this project to city staff for discussion during the summer of 2021, and we subsequently learned that the cities had a new priority on sea level rise, including incorporating sea level rise measures directly into the zoning code. Hearing this priority actually prompted us to slow our application process while we coordinated with the city and One Shoreline to better understand the goals of the new measures. We engaged a renowned shoreline engineering firm to redesign our project to meet the new standards and incorporate shoreline protection at FEMA certifiable levels. Ultimately, we commend the city of Burlingame for bold, forward-thinking leadership on climate change, and we're excited to propose a project that incorporates over $20 million of shoreline infrastructure designed at a 17-foot high crest elevation for 100-year resilience. Peninsula Crossing is setting the standard for sea level rise resiliency and protection of the inland floodplain. In designing our proposed solution, we wanted to ensure that the protection for the future did not come at the expense of great park space today. By integrating earthen berms into the landscape and burying protective walls where necessary, our design presents a seamless natural shoreline. This nature-based coastline protection becomes at once a pleasant place for recreating and a reliable infrastructure solution for maximum future adaptability. The engineered levee, designed to withstand the lateral pressure exerted by rising seas, is essentially hidden under layers of biodiversity in the Bay Trail. This plan shows the portion of the city that will be protected by a 17-foot high elevation delineation. When we first mapped this contour, we were struck by the magnitude of the area. This area is at increasing risk of flood. We are excited to contribute meaningfully to protecting these key city areas, including the Broadway Business District and Rollins Road neighborhood, and to protecting critical infrastructure, including the Caltrain tracks and the 101. As is perhaps already evident, environmental sustainability serves as the foundation of Peninsula Crossing. We are one of the first commercial projects to embrace the city's ambitious REACH code and will be one of the largest all-electric lab complexes in the region. Heating and cooling will be powered exclusively from electricity, representing a 73% reduction in carbon emissions as compared to a traditional gas boiler system. We are taking steps to dramatically reduce potable water use. We plan to install low-flow plumbing fixtures throughout, which will result in a 25% reduction in water demands as compared to other lab buildings. The landscape of Peninsula Crossing serves a dual purpose, provides a beautiful public park space, as we've already discussed, but it's also a working landscape, reestablishing natural stormwater patterns. Rainwater that falls onto the site will be conducted to planting areas and recharged back into the ground using natural processes to limit the burden on the city's storm drain system. Furthermore, the overall reduction in paved surfaces mitigates the heat island effect. Biophilic design emphasizes the blending of indoors and out. Peninsula Crossing features terraces and balconies, public plazas, and open space, allowing tenants and visitors to experience sunlight and fresh breezes. We aim to set a new benchmark for development that acknowledges the importance of wellness, open space, and sustainability. This new life science hub will create immediate and long-term economic benefits to the city of Burlingame. Knowing the importance of economic development for the city, we engaged a third-party economics firm to study and estimate the project's fiscal impact. Peninsula Crossing will generate significant one-time contributions, including an estimated $4.5 million bayfront development fee, $14.5 million public facilities impact fee, $35 million housing linkage fee, totaling $54 million. The housing fee could subsidize hundreds of affordable housing units. Furthermore, Peninsula Crossing will generate significant annual revenue for the city in perpetuity. This includes approximately $2.6 million in property taxes accrued to the city's general fund, $400,000 in new TOT tax, and over $100,000 in new sales tax and business license taxes. The project aims to realize the city's economic development goals with significant job growth. Life science and research tenants will generate 4,000 to 5,000 new jobs directly across a range of skill levels. We will use our extensive experience in the life sciences to attract the most exciting and dynamic companies in this sector to Burlingame. Our tenants are engaged in breakthrough science, seeking cures to common diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. The construction of the project will also create 300 jobs over years of project build-out. Furthermore, we forecast growth in adjacent small businesses and hotel employment, and more broadly as Burlingame becomes an established life sciences cluster. DivCo West aims to establish Peninsula Crossing as a new place, integrating a preeminent life science development and lush public park into the city of Burlingame. In the recent general plan, the city recognized the Bayfront as an area ripe for investment and opportunity. The general plan specifically identified the district as a focus for employment growth and economic development, increasing the allowable density to 3.0 FAR, which equates to 1.5 million square feet on our site. After months of collaborative design, considering a project layout that reflects the community priorities, we are eager to propose Peninsula Crossing. It has the potential to be a transformative development for the city of Burlingame. The project includes 3 buildings, 2 parking garages, and acres of open space. It totals 1.5 million square feet, smaller than the allowable 1.57 million. We are going to convert this collection of derelict buildings and parking lots into a hub for life science innovation, surrounded by revitalized natural open space and linked to the community by the Bay Trail. I'll close with this image of the Gateway Plaza we proposed for the south end of the site. We started meeting with the city in summer 2021, and we recently submitted our formal application. In the coming months, we look forward to working together with all of you in the Burlingame community to see the project come to fruition. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss Peninsula Crossing today. We welcome any questions or feedback from all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. And let's see, colleagues, do you have any questions or any? Let's hold off on the comments, but let's first ask any questions. Councilmember O'Brien.
Thank you, Virginia, for a very good presentation. Back to mention the shuttles every 15 minutes. Is that during, or is that throughout the whole, through the whole day?
I had trouble hearing that in total, but I think
Okay.
the shuttle schedule will be, yeah, if I understood right, it's sort of how often the shuttle schedule will be. And I'll say that, you know, we're in discussion with commute.org and committed to ensuring that the shuttle allows for efficient service to and from the Caltrain station during, you know, peak hours. And that's publicly available and free.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Councilmember Coulson.
Question for our staff more than Whitco. And Virginia, thank you for an excellent presentation as well. This is very fun to see the manifestation of all the conversations. But Kevin and Ruben, is this, this seems to be kind of a gold standard and a platinum, whatever the top standard, and I'm really proud of it. Does this feel like something that will be replicable with other parcels on the Bayfront as they get developed, and it's a standard that we can continue to adhere to for new developments?
Yes, I would say so. I think that was part of our interest in having it presented. You can kind of cross-reference it directly back to what we've put in the zoning ordinance and in the general plan. So it's a really good illustration of both the approach to community benefits as well as sea level rise. This is a much larger project than any of the others we're looking at. So the scale is a little different, but certainly the approach is replicable to others as well.
Thank you. I think that's really important. And I appreciate that such a committed developer took such an early position on this and has worked so cooperatively.
Thank you. You see Commissioner Gall has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have two questions. One is back on your site section, there was a reference to 17 feet at the sea wall for sea level rise. Could you clarify that? I'm not sure I understand how that works or how much the site would rise or.
Sure. So the 17-foot crest elevation requirement is directly from the city's zoning code, and that's measured above NAVD 88. The site today is at approximately 10 feet above grade, and so we'll be reaching that crest elevation of 17 feet throughout the site. Along the creek, it's 16 feet per the zoning code requirement.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. The other question I had is in relation to the retail space that I saw not only on the site plan but also in the elevations. How much retail space that would be accessible to the public will there be?
There's 5,000 square feet in the south building that will be a retail cafe restaurant open to the public.
Will there be any in the other buildings?
No, not planned in the other buildings.
Okay.
And the location of that retail is intentional because it's actually viewable in this diagram. It'll be very visible from this intersection. And so it's one of the few places on the site that's visible from multiple roads, but also engages the bay. So that location is very intentional.
Right. Well, I was just wondering, as people are traveling along the Bay Trail, which I expect to become even more popular with this connection, that there's a potential for other retail spaces in the other buildings along that trail. But
no, it's a good question. There is also a location for a bike share along the back of one of the other buildings facing the bay. and other sort of recreational zones. So we're definitely very focused on that being an engaging experience as you travel along the site.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Colson, your hand is still raised. Do you have an additional question? No, very good. And then I'm going to go to Commissioner Camerado.
Hi, thank you. It's a beautiful project. So my one question is, have you guys looked at the reflection of the exterior of the building as it relates to birds and wildlife? Just one of those things that I'm sure we'll get some comments about in the public. So I thought I'd bring it up now.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's definitely the bird safe element of our project is a big focus. And so we're working with H.T. Harvey and 2 different ornithologists on their team to ensure that the project takes into account bird safe design guidelines. We don't yet, the project is still in design, so we don't have the exact frit pattern established. But in terms of the reflectivity and the glazing materials, those are all within certain criteria to reflect bird safety.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move on to Commissioner C.
Yes, thank you. So a couple of questions. One, I was wondering if there was any thought to building out some type of a kiosk or information booth type space that may be out in that public plaza that could serve as for information, for transportation guidance, even information about the marshland or the natural reserves out there, and just was curious if that was something that was thought about or could be considered.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a great question and point. We've been working with the Bay Trail using their design guidelines in terms of wayfinding, and we also have certain locations that we've scouted out to be places that we could have materials about the nature in the area, about sea level rise. And so going forward, we'll be looking forward to collaborating with experts in those areas to think about what is the best information and also art to be sort of engaging the public.
Okay, great. My second question was just there was the slide that showed the parking garages and the 3 buildings. There were the number of stalls listed per parking garage. It looks like the north parking garage is mostly servicing the north building, it would seem, with the south parking maybe split between the south and the center building, just by distance. Obviously, people could walk further and park, but to account also for the retail space and all the extra visitors who may be coming more towards the southern part of this development, has the parking been thought through to allocate the appropriate parking throughout, I guess, mostly on the southern side of what I was concerned about, there not being enough parking as opposed to the north side of the development?
Yeah, so just as you recognize, the public will be sort of more concentrated on the south. That's where the cafe is and kind of the plaza. And so we've located the 40 public stalls in the south parking garage. The south building is the smallest, so that will be serviced entirely by the south parking garage. The other ones will be shared, as you correctly guessed. And so the other aspect of this is it's very intentional that it's 2 parking garages and 3 buildings. That allows the overall site plan to be human scale and engaging, instead of having 3 dedicated parking garages for 3 buildings. So it's an urban design scheme that's very intentional.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Pfaff?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. You did not, or I missed it perhaps, you did not mention the relative heights of the structures. So I'd be curious about that. And also, I think in my head, I'm trying to do a comparative, like sculpturally, how everything will look. And the staff will have to correct me on this, but I believe the meta, is that what they're called? Meta structures of old Facebook, Oculus, I think they top out at the highest ones are 95, if I'm not mistaken. And so I wanted to compare. And also right in the area where you are, I think the closest, one of the taller buildings perhaps is probably not the Hyatt, but something else down there. I get the hotels mixed up. If you could just sort of share that. And then I do have one more question after this. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, our buildings are 185 feet plus the parapet on top of that. And 11, so that's 11 stories. And the parking garages are 100 feet, 10 stories. And I'll just add kind of what the height allows. I mean, for us, the creation of the public open space was a real priority for the project. And so by going high, but still being below the allowable GFA for the area, we're actually unlocking an open space that we think is really meaningful, including the adaptable sea level rise. So a lot of thought behind the height of the buildings and the parking garages themselves.
Thank you. I wonder if staff has the height of the Facebook buildings and the Hyatt, so that we can just, I'm interested. I think that's a good question that Commissioner Pfaff brings up, just kind of relative to what's there. Does anybody know the height of the Hyatt?
Might actually be the Sheraton, might even be higher. I don't know that the Hyatt actually is that tall now, come to think of it, but I may be wrong. Is it the Sheraton? I don't know. The hotel's Marriott, I don't know.
Well, then there's also a tower behind the Hyatt there that's I believe is taller than the Hyatt, but
I think that would be useful to know those relative. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mayor Ortiz.
Okay.
The other, so if I could just understand this, you're saying 100, the highest building or buildings are 185 plus the parapet, which did you say? You didn't say what that is, but anyway, is that 10 more feet perhaps? So they're about 200. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the parapet will take them above 200.
Above 200. Okay. So then the second thing I would like to ask is it's just a curiosity. So you have projects all over, it sounds like all over the country, which is great, but I wonder, have you had any difficulty filling your tenant space? Office seems to be, kind of, I know we're going to get those questions. So as far as more office. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. These are designed to be flexible so they can support office or life science use. And it's very hard to predict with certainty years in the future, but I'll say to date, we've experienced extremely high demand of life science tenants and see that area as growing abundantly in the Bay Area specifically. This location is very intentional, so it's easy access to SFO. It's sort of in a growing submarket, and we're going to be the largest project within this Peninsula submarket. Also, anecdotally, I just got back from our Cambridge project where we have tenants that are leasing projects before, just as construction drawings are complete. And so that doesn't have any indication on this necessarily, but we value our relationships with tenants and with bioscience companies very highly. And that will be a big part of our strategy of leasing these projects.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I see Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Calkins, for the presentation. I know we'd all love to get a copy of your deck, and I assume that that'll be possible. I have a couple of comments, and then we'll reserve more generic comments about development for later in this conversation. My first question has to do with the rise and fall of the Bay Trail. So how do we think about, if we're, actually, let me take a step back. I want to endorse Councilwoman Colson's point that this is a remarkable set of public benefits for the city of Burlingame, in my judgment, to be able to defend this much of the seawall, to be able to finish the Bay Trail, which is a huge public asset, I think, and to get this kind of open space is remarkable. And I think we can all agree that this is a huge step up from the last owner's application for this property. And it's in keeping, in my judgment, with what the city envisioned when we rezoned for 3.0 FAR for the Bayside. But I am curious, just mechanically, how if the site overall is rises 17 feet above the sea, but then it has to fall down on either side. How does it step down is my practical question. So for example, on the left side of this rendering, how does that step down to the property next door?
It's a good question, because as you outlined, there's like a 7-foot difference in grade. And so we will be designing a tapered drop off and trying to ensure as much as possible that the protection remains across our site frontage, but also that the experience along the Bay Trail is one that's enjoyable and of course accessible. And so the specific design of that ramping has not been fully engineered, but it's something that we'll be figuring out and coordinating with the adjacent owners. And in addition to that, I think, as you know, One Shoreline is working on a project that includes this project reach. And so that's part of why we've been meeting with them over the past several months to ensure that their design guidelines align with what we're designing to, so that when they come in and build protection north and south of this site, that's something that can tie in to our site.
Okay, great. I do also want to echo Councilman Colson. I mean, I do think this is sort of a remarkably complete application, which I think makes all of our jobs a lot easier. We're not here having to negotiate sea level defense or open space. I mean, it's presented because you've been listening, I think, to the community and to council and to planning commissioners along the way. So I salute the completeness of this application. And too often I think we get half-baked applications and it wastes a lot of people's time. In fact, the prior application of this site wasted a lot of planning commission time over the years because it wasn't really well thought through. So thank you for having such a complete application. I think that's it from, one question that's maybe more of a suggestion. Box in Redwood City and now the Ceres Regis project in downtown Burlingame is going to open up their parking structure for public parking on the weekends. And I'd ask you to just consider that, because there is obviously a nice balance when workers go home, but the public wants to use space. So you might just consider whether it be possible to open up one of the parking structures for public parking on weekends to make it easier for families and cyclists and all to enjoy the asset. And then I guess a quick comment on heights. We chose 3.0 FAR. We sort of knew where that was going to take us. I was around during the Facebook planning. It was a different FAR, but more importantly, there was a really significant concern, as probably many of us remember, about windsurfing and wind shadows being thrown by those buildings. And so they were kept intentionally lower and also stepped in the way they are, and a number of other design features to try to protect the wind for the windsurfers off that particular point, which is a very popular place to windsurf. This does not have that particular set of issues. So thank you. I do have comments I want to make about development generally over on the Bayside, but I'll let Mr. Gardner or the mayor tell us when we can go beyond this particular project in our comments.
Perfect. Thank you. Commissioner C, you have an additional question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. One, I just wanted to actually want to reiterate what the vice mayor just stated, and I didn't get a chance to say in my last set of questions what a thorough presentation you have put together, and it's a very exciting project, potential development for our city. So just wanted to commend you for a great job putting this presentation and application together. But in general, you might have covered it in the beginning. I may have missed it. Is there a expected timeline on when this development will be complete?
I'm so glad you brought that up. I was going to respond to the Vice Mayor's comment on completeness with their response related to timeline. We did a lot of our work up front and kind of homework trying to get to a really complete application because we're excited to move forward as quickly as possible. And so, what we've put in is what we think a really complete package, and we'll be going through the environmental review process, coordinating with city staff on that. And as soon as we get that approval and the BCDC approval, we'll be ready to roll. And part of that impetus is that we think this shoreline protection is important. We think the project is, has the potential to be really transformational. And so we'd like to move as quickly as possible.
Great. Any kind of year forecast when you think the buildings will start to get occupied or completed for occupancy?
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to be under construction, next summer. So if environmental review goes quickly, it will be phased. So we'll be starting on the south building, and in part because we think that plaza will be so meaningful to the city and provide kind of the gateway. And so we'll be starting down here and building the Bay Trail, building the bridge, and then, move to the north after that and then fill in the middle. And so we're excited to get going.
That's really exciting. Thank you. And then my just one other quick question. You mentioned that the buildings have been designed to accommodate flexibility in terms of the type of tenants that may occupy the spaces. I think my understanding is correct that life science use has a taller plate height. Is that correct, or am I getting that wrong with some other type of
no,
space?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so these buildings are designed with a floor-to-floor height to accommodate lab spaces.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner C. Let me, Commissioner Camarado, you have an additional question?
I do. It's actually a comment. I think One Bay Plaza, which is right.
Can I ask that we reserve comments for after the public comments? So for right now, we can just do questions. That would be great. And we'll reserve the comments for the end.
Sure. I think it was not just a comment though. So it's comment question. So I think One Bay Plaza is down the street and that's at 9 stories. And so I think when you bring this in front of us or in front of staff, it'd be nice to see how that relates to the height of these buildings as well. So kind of bring into consideration all the other buildings that are kind of around the site.
Yeah, and then the ones that are planned for them. So yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner Camarado. Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. This is for Virginia. Virginia, is that park then now sitting on the land that a few years ago, the Transit Authority was using that for staging, and it was just, they priced it way too high for us to be able to afford it. But it seems now like in this project, that land is coming back in as a park. Is that correct?
This land was used for staging at one point during the intersection. And so that will be kind of a park in this muted tidal wetland.
Okay.
This triangle is owned by the city.
Oh, that triangle is owned by the city. Okay, that's interesting.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's make sure we figure that out. And then the second question I have is to Virginia again. And it relates to the FAR and the height, which is in order to build and add the $20 million of infrastructure, the way the project really pencils. And I'm hoping when we were thinking about how to design all this on the Bayfront, does giving you that extra elevation, is that what allows you to bring the buildings in, give all the open space, but it also makes the project pencil in order that you can do these additional $20 million of public benefits?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I think the FAR of 2.79 is what we're proposing. It's below the 3.0, but by building that square footage, that allows us to invest significantly in the public space. the height, and I should say the 20 million is on the shoreline infrastructure piece only. So that's the levies. That doesn't really reflect the recreational spaces and a number of other things we're doing for public benefits. Then the height itself, that's what allows us to come back from the bay and come back from the creek, right? And sort of step back and create enough space that there is a really engaging open space, and that, you know, we went through the design of these levees as being adaptable berms and not engineered seawalls. And if we were closer to the bay and had wider, flatter buildings, we would be in a place where we would have to build more like a seawall system.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation.
Thank you. And I do have a couple questions on the public benefit, the property tax projection. It seems like that's a little bit overstated. Can you tell me where that number came from?
Yeah, that's based on the property values, and it's the amount that's accrued to the city's general fund. And it's based on, we engaged EPS, which is a professional economic planning system. They used the anticipated future property tax receipts.
Yeah, it seems like that
We'll be happy to discuss in more detail and share with you, you know, the portion of the report that comes up with that figure too in future discussion.
It strikes me as that may be the full property tax, not just the portion that goes to the city. So that's why it seems a little high, but we can pick that up later. Also, on the 40 public parking, the 40 stalls, how did you guys arrive at that number? And is there a possibility that it could be increased?
Yeah, we looked at precedent projects that actually had smaller numbers as relates to the size. And then we talked to BCDC about what they might request. And we're still, you know, just in the process of engaging BCDC on the DRB process. And so we'll see if we get additional feedback from them at this time, but this was above the initial request, but certainly something we can discuss.
Very good, thank you. And then Mr. Gardner, did you have a comment or did you have an answer about one of the issues that was brought up earlier?
I do. So actually I have probably 3 different things to report back on based on questions we've had here. And I can do that now. I also see there's a member of the public who would like to speak. So perhaps
let's answer the questions and then we can go to comments after that. So yeah, if
sure.
you could.
So first of all, just speaking of what we've just discussed with the revenues, we are having a revenue study done for the Bayfront by the same firm that's doing our commercial linkage fee analysis. So a lot of people are asking this question, what are the fiscal implications of not just this development, but others, and how it relates to TOT and other inputs into the general fund. So we should have that it'll first go through the Economic Development Subcommittee of the City Council, and then most likely will then be shared with the rest of the council and the commission later this year. In terms of the sea level rise, I wanted to clarify I believe in the case of this site and certainly others, it's not that you're necessarily raising the entire site to the new level of, in this case, 17 feet. It's that's the crest elevation of a sea level rise protection. So whether it's a levee or a mound or a ecotone slope, what have you, it doesn't require the entire site to be raised. And in fact, that would be quite an undertaking if you were trying to. So what'll happen instead is typically the buildings will be raised a little bit with maybe, and again, I'm not sure if this applies to this one or not, but sometimes they'll be parking on the ground floor and then the first floor elevation will be a little higher up, but the entire site does not need to be raised up. And then the last, I do have some of these building heights that we had asked about. The Hyatt Regency across the street is 128 feet. And the One Bay Plaza next door is 117 feet. And this is something that the general plan did make a big change. So this is a paradigm shift, I guess you could say, in terms of the types of developments we've had on the Bayfront in the past versus now. When we did the general plan update, Bayfront was one of the areas identified as a change area. I think people did want to see something a little different. So it is a more intensive type of development than what we've seen in the past, but we're also, there was a lot of attention put into the general plan and the zoning standards to ensure that the new development would be compatible and offer things like these community benefits that, as Councilmember Colson mentioned, are really enabled by the higher development intensities.
Thank you, Director Gardner. Okay, colleagues, before we open it up to members of the public, anybody else have any questions? And having no raised hands, I'm sorry.
Can I just respond to one thing Director Gardner said?
Yes, please.
Add a comment. Okay. On the finished floor elevation, our project is designed with a 16-foot high finished floor elevation. So we're not raising the whole site, but we are taking a very conservative long-term approach to protection of the buildings and protection of the inner floodplain. So both of those pieces, and but integrating with the neighboring sites given the existing elevations.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, and then with that, we will open it to the public for any public comments. So I guess that is Mr. Huron is taking us there.
Yes, let me bring in Kevin Kresh first. Mr. Kresh, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Yeah, Mr. Kresh, we are not able to hear you.
My apologies. Saturday morning, got to get the mute off.
There you go. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Ortiz, City Council members, and City Planning Commissioners. I submitted a letter on April the 18th, and what I'm about to read is that letter for any other attendees or public that may be listening. Some of this certainly is redundant to what's already been discussed, but I wanted to offer my formal support by reading this letter. Hyatt Regency San Francisco Airport would like to offer strong support for the Divco West Woodstock development plan along Old Bayshore Highway. The Hyatt Regency is located directly across the street from the proposed project. This project will result in substantial redevelopment of a significant parcel of land along Burlingame shoreline. The proposed redevelopment will provide a much needed enhancement to the south section of the Bayshore Highway corridor and will include benefits such as a long overdue new bay trail with beautiful landscaping open to the community, as well as for our hotel guests and staff. A substantial investment to address the sea rise level, which will help protect Burlingame's Bayshore business community. 3 world-class buildings that will establish a new design standard for the entire peninsula, and a new employment base to support our room occupancy and special events. We want to continue efforts to make Burlingame a premier location for people to live, work, and enjoy the amazing natural resources of the shoreline. Divco West, Woodstock's vision and commitment to Burlingame community will help us achieve that goal. And so we are happy to support what's been presented to you today. I'm really happy to hear the types of questions that have been asked. I've had some of the same questions, and I really believe that this project and the design that's being presented today changes the entire face of the peninsula coastline for Burlingame and beyond. So we fully support the project, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kresh. Mr. Huron, do we have any other public comment?
Yes, we do. We have John Coleman, and now we'll bring him in as well. Mr. Coleman, you may begin once you unmute yourself.
Good morning. My name is John Coleman. I'm the CEO of the Bay Planning Coalition, and it's not often that we see proposals brought forth in a planning process like this that are so well thought out and developed, as mentioned by many members of the council and the Planning Commission. When you get right down to it, this project will bring significant investment in sea level rise resilience, which is critical San Mateo County. It will set the standard for the region for the all 9 Bay Area counties when you get right down to it. And it also really brings, appreciate the importance of the recreation benefit for the Bay Trail. When you talked about the community benefits, the recreation and economic cannot be underestimated. I think what the direction you're heading in the environmental sustainability that is being built into the project is phenomenal. I wish that more projects that were going through a planning process like Divco West is right now in Woodstock, that they followed the role that you're seeing today. And I think many of the questions that have been asked by the commissioners and council members have been excellent. They've been well thought out, clearly. And Bay Planning Coalition wholly endorses this project as it goes forward. And hopefully when the time is ready, we'll secure the support from both the Planning Commission and the City Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like that's it. And we don't have any public comment via the email. So we're all set.
Okay. So
I will just mention, I'm sorry to interrupt. We did receive a letter, and actually her hand is up. Lisa von Kirschner, if she would like to also speak. She sent a letter previously, general manager from the Marriott.
Please.
Can you hear me okay? Good morning,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Hello, Mayor Ortiz, and good morning, members of the council and city planning. My name is Lisa Kirschner, general manager of the SFO Marriott. My hotel is just down the block from this proposed project, and I'd like to read the letter that I sent in support of this project as well. The Marriott Hotel, we've been in touch with Woodstock Development and Divco West over the last several months. The project is very impressive. I'm very happy that they continue to get the community input as they develop this fantastic presentation. We are aware of the plans to redevelop this important portion of the Bayshore. Accordingly, as the second largest hotel on Bayshore Highway, we strongly support the presentation of the project as presented today. This project will act as a center of economic activity for Burlingame by creating a best-in-class design, boosting business for nearby hotels and businesses while generating millions of dollars directly to our city. Project will fill in, as you heard, many missing areas of the Bay Trail, creating continuity along the city's shoreline and connecting to our hotel directly. I also live here. I'm ad-libbing now, according to this letter I'm reading to you. I want to remind everyone, if you don't know, I do live here as well. I'm a resident of Burlingame. I've raised both my children here. And even before I took over as general manager of the Marriott, that Bay Trail, I tell you, is a gem. But it is a gem. I almost like to say it's like a beautiful lady with a dirty dress, unfortunately. According to my guess, and we go by something called guest satisfaction, it is probably the #1 comment that there's not much to do or see within walking distance. So this project doubly excites us at the Marriott because now you can walk to a beautiful park, walk through beautiful trails without walking through parking lots or buildings that are condemned or closed down. So I'm personally very pleased for this project, and thank you all for hopefully approving it and letting it go forward. To finish my letter, the project fits in with Burlingame's recently adopted general plan by thoughtfully balancing economic development priorities, planning for resiliency against sea level rise, and creating acres of public park space. It will do this by expanding upon the active recreation zone south of the project, providing new connections to the Broadway Business District, and establishing corridors along Old Bayshore Highway. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. And I really hope that this passes quickly so that we can start construction and beautifying our fabulous trail. I guess I would add one more thing, is business is pretty tough for us in the hospitality business, especially along Bayshore Highway, and tourism is not guaranteed. Occupancy is not guaranteed. There's no way that I can tell you we'll get back to 2019 between Kevin's hotel and mine and all the hotels along the road. Anything we can do to bring more to our beautiful SFO Bayshore Trail will really help us as we continue to attract more visitors back to Burlingame.
Thank you, Ms. Kirshner.
Thank you.
Okay, so colleagues, I think I see the Vice Mayor's hand was raised. So I will go with the vice mayor first, and there's just comments so we could wrap this section up. You're muted, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to take the conversation, and I know we need to make room for the housing conversation too, but I want to take our conversation more beyond the DivCo application. I don't know whether that would permit Councilman Beach to re-enter, and maybe it's too complicated. But the question I have is, so I would like Director Gardner, if you would, to speak to how much of the public benefit, and I'm thinking especially of the sea level resilience that DivCo is providing in this proposal, is carried out in the other Bayside developments. So, by my count, there's 4 other significant, maybe not as big, but still significant redevelopments at 567, 620, and 777 Airport, and then at 1669 Bayshore. And my question is, are we going to get the same level of sea level resilience from those proposals? Or is this out of DivCo's sort of good spirit? And for somebody who's inbound of the Bay, for example, 1669 Bayshore, how do we assure that it's sort of fair, that they don't have to build a seawall because they don't happen to be on the Bayside, but they're still benefiting from that? So how do we think about that from a public policy point of view? How does the commission, what standards should we expect the commission to insist on with these other applications that may not rise to council right away, and so forth? So can you speak to those sort of more broad public policy questions? Thank you.
Certainly. So this, I think, again, one of the reasons we wanted to show this project is it does implement what we are wanting to see from projects through the zoning code. And in fact, as the applicant mentioned, they've exceeded our requirements for the floor elevations in that they see the wisdom in planning for end of century, and that protects their investment as well. We have some of the other projects have a more phased approach where they're building partial protection to probably mid-century with an adaptation pathway to the end of century. And that's something there's kind of debate, including with One Shoreline, the merits of that approach. But should an application go that direction, we would then want a clear game plan for how the end of century adaptation would occur. Most likely to be through recording of an easement of some sort so that additional protection could be added in the future.
But not by the applicant? I mean, in other words, they're just going to punt to the public purse in the future? Is that their attitude?
So the public purse, and that gets to your other question, there is a cost associated with One Shoreline's project. That is something that will need to be worked out, whether it's an assessment district or what is an equitable way of paying for the project and assessing those who benefit. So those who benefit include everybody in the bayfront, and in fact, as you could see in the applicant's presentation, across the freeway and into the city. So although the projects along the bayfront are being asked to build in protection measures now, it does benefit the other properties. Most likely what will work is there will be some sort of credit. So should there be an assessment for an assessment district, for example, I'm not saying that this is the direction we're going, but let's say everybody is assigned an assessment, but then those who have already put in investments, such as $20 million for a FEMA certified seawall, would receive credit against their assessment. It's something we did similar with Burlingame Point. Burlingame Point installed some infrastructure improvements that exceeded what their obligation was for their public facilities impact fees. So we did a credit with that project as well to acknowledge that they had made that investment and that it was a benefit beyond just their particular project.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'll let others speak. I just, several of those addresses that I called out that are in process right now of some level of process in the planning department happen coincidentally to be the first place that is overtopped when sea levels rise. So the lagoon is one of the lowest points and it overtops first, and there's one or two different projects that are on the lagoon. And then that other lagoon on the Anza Lagoon on the bay side is another place that is one of the very first places to overtop, and there's development there. So I think I'll just speak for the commission, and which is, I think everybody would like to know, what can we expect? What's appropriate to expect a developer to do? And then I would hope that we could hold them to that expectation, because this is a massive investment. And I'm all in favor of making sure over time it's balanced, but while people are building, it'd be great if they could build to the future like DivCo is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for giving me the time.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember O'Brien.
Thanks, through the mayor. I do agree with the points that the Vice Mayor brought up, because I do think, DivCo is doing a phenomenal job of setting the bar. And I do hope future projects will follow that. DivCo's taken the being the first one out. This is the best way to start. It's really going to transform our bayfront, and I do think there's just so many amenities that are going to be offered to our residents here in Burlingame and outside of Burlingame. I did have a question, Virginia. I know on one of your slides, it did mention $20 million was the sea level improvement cost. I'd be curious to know, and you may not know now, all the amenities that you're incorporating into this project.
And Councilmember O'Brien, you're breaking up a little bit. So, so Virginia, were you able to get that question?
To the mayor, we'll need to reopen the public hearing in order to bring the applicant.
Okay, so let's just leave that question for offline, if you don't mind, Councilmember O'Brien.
Okay.
And we will move on. So I see. Do you have any other comments you want to?
So then I also wanted to add, it follows initial question. So and I've been having issues with internet here, that it was during peak hours. And so I'm wondering, it's possible to have that run a little bit longer, just because I like to see.
Councilmember O'Brien, you're breaking up. I don't think we're
that.
I think she said
is. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead and try that.
So that there's the possibility of the shuttle to go back and forth to the Broadway downtown areas, so that isolated just at the front.
Yeah, I think we lost you there. So okay.
Mayor Ortiz, I could respond. I think I understand what Councilmember O'Brien is asking, and could share some information on that. We have been working with commute.org, given the numbers of projects and the ability to coordinate all of these projects and have the shuttle really become more than it is now, more than just an employment shuttle. We've been looking at some routes that would loop into downtown Burlingame and Broadway. And the benefit of, we're getting more critical mass. There's more projects that will be using the shuttle, so it will be more feasible to have more frequent service. The base standard is 15 minutes during commute hours, but it's also based on demand, and commute.org has been quite responsive at really tweaking their routes and ensuring that they're serving their riders. So I think if demand is there, the feasibility of having more frequent service is also there. And now I'd say commute.org is totally on board with this, and actually very excited with the possibilities that shuttle service can provide to the Bayfront and into the rest of the city.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Director Gardner. So Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. So I really I want to thank the speakers who came today to support this project. It's really important to have the, to understand the impact on the surrounding hotels and their interest. I also really want to express how important this project is as a model project for other cities, not just in San Mateo County, but even up. I know Sausalito is looking at this very closely for their Bayfront. And I really want to thank Lynn Matterman and the staff and our city staff for just being able to think innovatively and set this up. I know that South San Francisco, Redwood City, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park are all looking closely at this through One Shoreline. And I feel very strongly that DIVCO is just absolutely the right partner to get this off and running. And the standard that they're setting is really going to, as Mr. Coleman said, not just be important in Burlingame, but throughout the whole Bay and potentially throughout the country. So thank you all. And thank you for just, being open-minded and working so hard with us on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. I don't wonder if any of the commissioners have any comments. Okay, so my comments are, I do share the positive thoughts that, actually, Commissioner Pfaff, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I couldn't find my hand button. Appreciate very much all the comments, the presentation, and I need to reiterate just what Vice Mayor Brownrigg mentioned. I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in my head of which addresses these are, but I'm thinking of one in particular that's where the old Gulliver's was. Personally, I was not very impressed with what they called a public benefit, and it was a sort of a quasi plaza that used part of the street is what they were calling the plaza. And it is those types of things I really do feel like that is so important that everybody have some skin in the game. And obviously those are not quite as large projects as this one is, but still it does mean something that everybody is working towards. Second, I feel like as far as planning goes, I would really like, I understand the coves are different, the wind issues are different. I get that. And there were reasons why some projects were allowed not to go higher than a certain profile or whatever. But I do think for planning purposes, it would be really useful if we had some kind of I don't know, not expensive, but just a 3D model of what is coming up, what are proposed. So we're not just kind of blindly doing these things, that we can kind of just develop profiles of what is going on, so we have a better judgment of where things are and how they're affected, how they affect the view, all kinds of things. So I just would like to be forward thinking on that as well. But I do appreciate all the comments, and certainly the presentation was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Camarado.
Yeah, so I think this is an exciting project for Burlingame. So I appreciate all the hard work that went into this. One of the things that came up in one of our planning commission meetings with another project was that there was a community benefit, or there was a possibility of having a park, and then the applicant came back and said because of safety issues that they were going to cut off that park. They're going to put a gate there because of some transient issues that could be happening on the bayfront with homelessness. So what I ask, and I think there was a comment about opening up the garage for this site. So I really want to make sure that the applicant understands that we don't want this closed off to the public. And as it relates to the public parking, if there's a way to keep that open and there's not a gate that goes into the buildings, that would be great for the Bayside. So I asked the applicant to really look into that prior to coming back to us, because I don't want them coming back a second time and then saying, well, we got to take it away. So it's going to be huge for our Bayside.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners? Okay, so my sense is we changed the zoning to be a little different, and I think this is the first project that's going to test that with the heights, and I think this is I'm glad this is the first project. It's setting the stage for this. I'm very comfortable with the presentation that they gave us and the public benefit that they're bringing to the city. So I'm, again, not, yeah, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for what you're bringing. And again, look forward to seeing the other projects trying to match what this one is bringing. So colleagues, anybody else want to, any final comments? And then Mr. Director, if we're done with this item, then we could take a short break and then reconvene. It is 10:22. What do we say we come back at 10:30? Very good. So let's take a break for a few minutes. So thank you all for your comments and thank you for the presentation.
See you at 10:30.
Okay, it is 10:30. Do we have everybody back? Hello.
Mayor, can you hear me? I've been having some issues with internet.
Yeah, much better than before. So,
Okay,
yeah.
I exited and came back in, so.
Yeah, okay, maybe a few more minutes to see. Mr. Vice Mayor, you back? And welcome back, Councilmember Beach. We missed you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and there's the Vice Mayor. So with that, we are moving on to item number 5B, which is a housing element update overview and discussion. Mr. Director Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor Ortiz, Chair Schmid, members of the council and commission. This presentation is an overview of the housing element update, which is ongoing. We've been doing some community outreach and wanted to bring everybody up to speed and get some input on where we've been and policies, programs, where we're going with that. I want to acknowledge our housing element update team is myself, Planning Manager Ruben Hurin, Economic Development and Housing Specialist Joe Sanfilippo, who is also here today. And then Assistant Planner Fazia Ali has been helping with the community outreach as well. So next, please. What we'll go over today is the relationship of the housing element to the general plan. We'll talk about the housing production that we've been seeing in recent years and in the current cycle, as they refer to it in housing element speak. We'll talk about the site's inventory, which is a requirement for our next housing element update and the approach that we're taking on that, and then provide a summary of the community input that we've received to date. Next, please. So general plan, next. Envision Burlingame, which is what we call the general plan, was adopted in 2019, and it has really given us a good footing for the housing element. It was a very pro-housing plan and included identifying new areas for housing, as well as increasing housing opportunities in areas that already did allow housing. Next, please. This is the general plan land use map. And if you can go to the next slide, please. These are what were called change areas. So one thing that we asked when we started the general plan was what parts of the city do you really like and would just assume keep the same, and what are parts of the city that could maybe have some changes. So all of these areas that are shown here were identified by community members as possibilities for changes in different shapes and forms. And those changes are articulated in the general plan. Some of them are subtle changes and others are more substantial. But in any case, this has been also the focus then of our housing element update, looking at housing in these change areas. Next, please. One of the change areas, and probably captured the imagination of the general plan more than anything, was the North Rollins Road area. We've been working on a specific plan, and I want to acknowledge Council members O'Brien and Colson and Planning Commissioner Say have all been on the advisory committee for this plan. We've run it through the advisory committee and our technical advisory committee. The consultant is making refinements based on the feedback, and it will be ready to come to the Planning Commission and the City Council in the next few months. Next, please. Let's look at housing production and where we've been and where we're going and how that all fits in. So RENA 5, and I'll back up for some terminology. RENA, or HNA, stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And these are numbers that start from the state. The state figures out how many housing units are needed statewide for the next 8 years. Then that trickles down to the regions of the state. So in this case, ABAG and MTC cover the Bay Area and make those allocations to the region. And then within the region, each city receives an allocation of units to produce. So RENA 5 stands for the 5th cycle of the housing element update. We're now entering cycle 6. So if you hear people say RENA 5 or RENA 6, that's what it's referring to. So we're in the last year of what's known as RENA 5. And at this point, we have nearly 2,000 units that are approved and under construction, either approved or under construction, sorry. And of those, 16% are designated affordable to either moderate income, low income, or very low income. I'll refer to the staff report. There are tables there showing what those different income categories include in terms of size of household. They change every year based on the county median income. So if the median income goes up, those categories also go up. If it goes down, they adjust downwards. So it's a dynamic definition. And then there are additionally 1,228 units that are either under review or pre-submittal. Pre-submittal would refer to projects that have not been submitted but have been in public in some shape or form. And in particular, the Peninsula Wellness Community has shown some preliminary plans in public. They have not submitted an application, but we include their numbers in that total as anticipation that that number would be coming in. And of the ones that are under review, approximately 20% are affordable to either moderate, low, or very low income categories. Next, please. I'm going to go over a few. We put these slides together also for the Housing and Community Development Department. We gave them an overview yesterday. That's the state agency that will be reviewing our housing element. So we wanted to show some examples of projects that have been completed or are being reviewed. The 1008-1028 Carolyn Avenue project, also known as either Summerhill or the Anson, is now completed. If you could step through the next couple slides, please. It shows this is construction. It started with 2 closed up car dealerships. Here it is under construction. And then the next slide shows this is it completed. This slide is from last month. Next slide, please. 290 units, 268 rental apartments, and 22 ownership townhomes. And the ownership townhomes is something that's interesting. You'll see that we're testing this as a policy question as well. Some of you have maybe heard of this term, the missing middle. And the missing middle refers to middle density. So what we tend to see are either single family homes or higher density multi-units. We don't see as many townhouses and smaller single family homes and duplexes and such. So this project is unique in that it did include 22 ownership townhomes. In terms of middle, it again refers to middle density, not necessarily middle income. However, the sales prices of these townhomes were considerably less than what a newly built single family home would be in one of our established neighborhoods. Next, please. The Village of Burlingame is really the star in terms of allowing the city to start addressing needs of its workforce all the way down to the very low income category. 132 new affordable units on a former parking lot. 78 are for the workforce and 54 are for seniors. The site is just under an acre, so it's fairly dense. It's 156 units per acre, but it does include a city park that's open to everybody. And then it includes the parking structure that's now open over on between Lorton and Highland. And another reason we keep talking about what was the previous use is this is something that the Department of Housing and Community Development looks at as we start identifying future sites for housing. We want to show that there's a track record of there aren't any vacant sites in Burlingame, or maybe there's 1 or 2, but most of these are redevelopments of existing uses. And we need to convince the Housing and Community Development Department that this is something that we're seeing all the time now, and it is viable and believable that we will continue to see it in the future. Next, please. One Adrian Court is the first project in the Rollins Road area that we've talked about. And this was a former light industrial single-story tilt-up buildings. Here you can see it's now under construction. This slide is from last month, so they've just broken ground and started the foundations, 265 units. And this is the first project we've had that has been able to include low income, which is 80% or less of area median income, rather than previously the projects had just been able to reach that moderate income category. So this is reaching a new segment of our workforce that we've been eager to reach, and we're excited about that. It also includes a park, and it's publicly accessible. This has been something important in the Rollins Road area, is that because it is existing industrial area, we want amenities that will be attractive to residents as well as those who are working in the area. So this park would be available to anyone. And then there's another project which you're most likely familiar with at 30 Ingold. Same thing, another city park. Next, please. And then last but not least in this quick tour of projects is 1766 El Camino Real. This is replacing a 2-story office building. In many cities, this would not be conceivable to take down a 2-story office building for housing. But in this case, given the demand for housing and the strength of the market, in this case, it is being proposed. You can go to the next slide, please, with 311 units. What's important with this one as well is this is our first project that has included units affordable to the very low income category. This is something we didn't really know whether a market rate project could include units down to that level. That's 50% or less of area median income. So in this case, they were able to use the state density bonus in order to make it all pencil out, and they're able to provide 22 very low income apartments within this development. This is still under review, so the Planning Commission has looked at it once in a study session, and it will come back to the Planning Commission at a future date. Next, please. So looking at our sites inventory. Next, please. Our allocation for this current cycle, RENA 6 as it's called, is 3,257 units. By coincidence, that's just a slightly higher than what our general plan had anticipated on its own. So that's the good news, is that the general plan, independent of any allocations or guidance from anywhere else, it was a decision of the community to respond to the need for housing and figure out what's the right amount of growth for Burlingame. As it turns out, it's just about the same as what our regional allocation is. This is a big jump from our prior allocation of 863 units, but as you can see from these prior slides, we've already exceeded that in terms of total numbers. A little harder to reach each of these income categories. Every city receives an allocation based on the different income categories, and that's based off of the profile of its workforce. Every city struggles with this, so it's a worthy goal. We want to keep working on that, but it's also not unique to Burlingame that it's hard to reach those lower income categories. Next, please. So looking at the pipeline, we're already a long ways there in terms of total units. If all of the 2,299 units in the pipeline are developed, then this is how the allocation works. There's currently 454 proposed within downtown. There's 983 proposed within Rollins Road, 690 within North Burlingame. There's 15 on the El Camino Real corridor, 7 near Broadway, and there's an additional 150 under construction right now at the along Rollins Road next to Broadway, next to North Park Apartments over there. Next, please. So that would give us, we would need 965 more units, and there's no magic to where those go. What we have been doing in the past, or sorry, in the background is looking at all of the potential sites within the city and going through our GIS and flagging lots and saying that these are the ones that we think based on our experience could be developed. And then we've identified more potential sites than what we're showing here. So this is a prorated, this would be a scenario. This is not to say there's any obligation to this particular allocation, but based on the types of sites that are available, we would expect perhaps some downtown, most on the north end, a few in Broadway, maybe more in Broadway. We'll keep looking at that. One thing I didn't mention is our next specific plan will be for Broadway. So there may be further opportunities as we look at that area. Next, please. So community input. We did start, as we talked to the community, we wanted to mention some things that were already on our minds that we already had heard about. First of all, the housing element is obligated to find housing that meets the needs of the community and the workforce. So that includes both people that live here in Burlingame now, as well as the workforce, which may or may not be living in Burlingame, but who we would like to accommodate better. The general plan, as we mentioned, has provided ample capacity, so we don't have to do rezonings. It's not to say that should there be thoughts to making some changes, that is certainly allowed, but we're in a different position than other communities where they are trying to figure out where is the housing going to go and knowing that they would need to change their zoning to accommodate. Here it would just be by choice. We do want housing that is affordable to the city's workforce, and certainly the city has been making great strides in recent years towards that goal, and it's something to continue to work on. Something that's new is the effective use of housing funds, and the commercial linkage fees and housing residential impact fees were adopted within this last housing element cycle. So we did not have the benefit of those funding sources the last time we updated our housing element. And then city resources in terms of land is the example of the village of Burlingame. There are quite a few more city parking lots should we decide that we want to replicate that project in some way. That is another resource that could be available. Next, please. So why in particular, something that's important is we talk about the very low income category and that project that we talked about, as well as over on El Camino Real, as well as the village of Burlingame, is that nearly 40% of the workforce here in Burlingame makes less than $3,333 a month, which equates to about $40,000 a year. Now these numbers are from, I'm squinting here, they're actually, these may be just updated, so this could be quite accurate. So generally that's capturing the service. We have a lot of service jobs in the city. Your baristas, waiters, waitresses, hotel staff would all be quite likely to be in that less than $40,000 a year category. Teachers and public servants tend to be a little higher than that. So they would be in probably what would be the low income category as opposed to very low. But it does show that there's a pressing need for accommodating these very low income as defined employment. Next, please. In our messaging, and this was something we heard from the council when we did our annual progress report of the housing element back in January, or sorry, back in March, was we wanted to really tell the story because Burlingame is a little different in that our zoning already can accommodate what we need. And in fact, the policies and programs, there seemed to be a lot of support for what's already existing. We wanted to tell the story and let the community know that, in particular, because of the general plan, we're ahead of the game in terms of being able to meet the obligations of this housing element cycle. Next, please. We've done some outreach, and Actually off of the slide, but starting last fall, the county did some countywide housing outreach meetings, and those are all recorded. There's some really good presentations. For example, if somebody wanted to learn more about how the regional housing needs allocation works, there's a whole workshop on that. I've provided links in the staff report, but and then we also have those links on our housing element page on the city's website. But starting this year, calendar year, we went for Burlingame specific outreach. We've had a couple of pop-ups at the Fresh Market and on Broadway. We've had 2 community workshops virtually on Zoom, one on March 23rd and one on April 6th. There's also been a survey to city staff that we'll go over in a moment. Interviews with different housing organizations that had expressed interest in talking with us. And then here we are at the joint City Council Planning Commission meeting on April 23rd. From here, we are drafting parts of the plan already, and we will go full force into drafting the plan after this meeting and start getting comments back from the state as we go forward, and plan to have public hearings in the fall with both the Planning Commission and the City Council. Next. These are some photos from the pop-ups. On the left is Burlingame Avenue and at the Fresh Market, and on the right is on Broadway. What we asked them particularly with the site selection was more confirmation or sharing knowledge of this is where the general plan had anticipated putting housing. Put a dot if you agree with that, or if you have some caveats to that, that's what the Post-its are for. So it was both a communications exercise to say this is our plan, but also what do you think of the plan? Next, please. What we heard is people acknowledge Burlingame is a great place to live. It's a good community. They like the scale of the neighborhoods, the local shopping and transit. There is support for housing near transit, which is consistent with the general plan. That was a big part of the approach for situating where the housing would be encouraged in the general plan. There is need for supporting renters, families, seniors, and people with disabilities. And in fact, a linkage between people with disabilities and the extremely low income category is something that we've heard a number of times that we would want to work on. And support for affordable housing that would allow essential workers to live in the community. Next, please. Some concerns. Housing affordability is top of everybody's list. It is an expensive place to live, to either buy a home or rent. So that's a concern. Concern with traffic and parking with any new development. That's something we want to look at. We've heard some feedback on trees, and I think in particular, it's a focus on El Camino Real. Good news is the reinvestment project with El Camino Real through Caltrans is underway. So I think that would address some of the concerns. It may also be there's concern with trees as we have our continuous drought. So just thinking proactively about that, and some concern with commercial development and the impact that that might have as we see some large developments and how that might affect the local housing market here in Burlingame. Next, please. In the workshops, this was something that we had MIG, who was both they were our consultant for the general plan, and then we had their public outreach team help us with our outreach here on the housing element. These look like Post-its. These are actually from the chat that occurred during our Zoom workshops. They had somebody in the background who was transcribing all the chats onto what would look like a Post-it note. So it's simulating what we would be doing in a public workshop in person, people writing things down on Post-it notes and putting them on the wall. These are also in the summary report. So you can look at these more specifically, but what I'll say is, again, I'm always impressed with public engagement in Burlingame. We got some really good critical feedback, very smart comments. People know their issues, and they don't all agree on everything, but they all have constructive feedback, and that's been very helpful. Next. To report back on the poll of city staff, this was something that the city council had asked for. City staff would be essential workers, and there is an interest in having staff be able to live closer to Burlingame if they could. This could also apply to other institutions, but in this case, we did a poll of city staff. 126 responses out of 220 employees. That's really good for a poll. For those who have done polling, that's a high response rate. Of those who responded, 82% reported that they live outside of Burlingame. 30% spend more than 30 minutes commuting each way. And 66% would like to live in Burlingame if they could find housing that was suitable and available. Next. 64% of respondents would be interested in renting an apartment if rental for housing for employees would be available. And this would include the village and other projects in the future. And we wanted to check the idea. It's been discussed in the past, given the age of City Hall and its need for its kind of obsolescence. Would we want to include housing in a redevelopment of the City Hall site? And 61% would say that they would be interested in living either adjacent or on top of City Hall. Next, please. So the sample policies and programs, these are some policies and programs that we had heard through different outreach channels, through City Council, through Planning Commission. So we tried to think of what were some policies and programs we wanted to ask the community about. These were then vetted through our second community workshop, and the results of these discussions are in that summary report. These are not all of the programs, so that's why we're saying these are sample. These were just things that we had heard about, we knew people were thinking about, and wanted to see what people's thoughts were. One is the affordable housing opportunities, and if we think back to that Summerhill project with those 22 ownership townhouses built in conjunction with the rental apartments, is that something we'd want to encourage? But also looking at, we've had some questions about our condo conversion ordinance. Right now, projects less than 20 units are not eligible for condo conversions. So is that something we want to look at? And there's really two sides to that coin. On the one hand, the ordinance is there to protect rental housing, but then the other side is that conversions tend to be on the more affordable side of ownership and allow people to enter the market and start building some equity. So on the left are some townhouses here in Burlingame, and in that little photo on the right is an apartment that was converted to condos sometime in the past here in Burlingame. Next. Seismic retrofit assistance. Some of you may be aware we have a soft story ad hoc committee that has been meeting, and we've been looking at incentives for adapting, particularly the older buildings here in Burlingame that have what's considered a soft story. That's the ground floor with carports and standing on columns. That tends to be vulnerable in an earthquake. There's cost involved in doing a retrofit. The technology is fairly straightforward, bracing and shear walls, but there is cost involved. So what if some city funds were used to help owners retrofit in exchange for keeping some of their units at an affordable rate in the future? Next. Next, we asked about something very similar, but with energy efficiency upgrades. So what if a building wanted to either improve its energy efficiency or perhaps go all electric? Same idea, but on energy efficiency. Next. This was an idea that kind of took us by surprise, and this was a result of our first workshop. We had a member of the public say that she deliberately keeps she's a landlord, she keeps her units below market on purpose, and would like to know how could she find some eligible tenants who would qualify, who would be perhaps part of the workforce, the same type of households that we're looking to promote into our new construction. So our consultants told us that this is something some cities have done. They've allowed private landlords to enter some of their units into the city's inventory. And in terms of the city's inventory, what I should clarify is we have a pool of units that are managed through our housing provider, House Keys. And right now, those are all from development projects, but there's nothing to say that a private owner who had a few units that they were going to keep at below market might also want to enter that inventory, and then they have access to pre-screened tenants, and it could help them just in terms of finding those tenants. Next, please. We asked about acquiring or subsidizing naturally affordable units. We know this is something we've heard a lot from the community. There's a pro and a con. This tends to be a little more expensive, less cost effective than subsidizing new construction, just because of the way the financing works. But at the same time, there's currently a lot of naturally affordable units within Burlingame, and there's sensitivity to possibly losing those or having them priced out in the future. So that was something we wanted to ask about. Next. As mentioned, encouraging or perhaps requiring missing middle units, and recognizing that there could be interest in something like these townhome units that wouldn't necessarily come by default. So is it something we should be encouraging more in new developments? Next. And last, in terms of the policy questions we asked about were whether to offer subsidies for accessory dwelling units construction if there was a guarantee that those units would be available to at below market rents for a certain amount of time. Next, please. What you'll see in the summary report, we asked these questions and we did polling through the Zoom workshop, and then same thing with any comments that were written to chat were put on these Post-it note style rectangles. I will say the group responding, we were tending to get about a dozen responses per question. So I would not say this is certainly not a scientific poll, but it's more akin to a focus group where perhaps we have a dozen residents who are weighing in on. And I was impressed with the type of chat comments we were receiving and how kind of responsive and smart the responses were. People were not always agreeing with each other, but they all had really good points to raise. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that part of the report, we would welcome you to do that. Next, please. So where's our process from now? As mentioned, right now we're in our community outreach right at the tail end. We've started working on the draft, and we'll want to continue working on that draft in the next couple months. In the fall, we would have public hearings with the commissions and council, and then we are required to have the housing element adopted in January of 2023. So we have some time, but also some work to do, and wanted to check in with both the council and the commission on its directions as we work on this draft. Next, please. So this is open for any questions or comments from both the council and commission. Some suggestions, the kind of two big questions that we have as we are drafting this is, do we like the approach that the general plan has taken with these change areas? Any changes, or keep going with the course of action that we've already identified? And then the next slide, please. Suggestions for policies and programs. And this could include the ones that we've just shown here and talked with the community about, but it's not exclusive to that. So this is an opportunity. I think given that we already have the zoning capacity, the discussion has been less about trying to find sites for housing and more about what are the policies and programs that can support our residents and our workforce. So we would welcome both questions and suggestions from the council and the commission on policies and programs that they think would be worth exploring. And that is it. I think the next slide is our questions and discussion slide. And at that point, back to Mayor Ortiz and for I think similar format questions, and then if we have members of the public, and then discussion after that.
Thank you, Mr. Director. And then I will open it to my colleagues and to the commissioners for any questions that you have about the presentation. And I don't see any raised hands. Oh, Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Gardner. Awesome presentation. Just a great overview, very accessible and understandable, and so much to celebrate. My question, since I'll hold comments till after, do we have a sense of how much is in our housing impact funds? And I'm sorry, I didn't think to, I'm sorry if that was in the report or if you don't have that on the tip of your tongue. Thank you. Just to get a sense of what are in those funds from development.
I can report back. I don't want to guess and then have that show up in a newspaper article, because I want to make sure I've got the right number based on what's been collected. We certainly have more than we did even 6 months ago, and there will be more coming, so we can provide you with both what's already been collected as well as what is in the pipeline. So allow me to do that as a follow-up after this meeting.
Sure thing. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't think to ping you in advance.
No problem.
Commissioner Camerado.
Kevin, I have two things to ask, and thanks for the detailed report. One is, has the city of Burlingame, and maybe the city council can answer this, have we looked at city transfer tax fees as it relates to the selling of properties in Burlingame? Hillsborough just adopted a 30-cent city transfer tax fee. We don't do that typically anymore. And if we did do something like this, it could generate some income that maybe we could allocate towards some more housing for our community. So that's one question. I don't know if you have the answer to that.
I would defer to City Manager Goldman, as I know there has been a larger discussion of tax measures and possibilities, and I can't recall whether that's been discussed or but also that's an ongoing discussion.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question? My Zoom has been having issues.
So City of Hillsborough just adopted a city transfer tax fee for the sale of properties that is 30 cents per $1,000. And so what I was thinking was, and Burlingame does not have that as part of our closing costs as it relates to new sales properties. So I'm wondering if we've had a discussion, if City Council has had a discussion about that. And if not, would that be something that would the City Council be looking at something like that, and we could take the city transfer tax and allocate it towards some new housing or help supplement maybe the city hall and housing above and any of that type of stuff?
So property transfer, I'm a little confused about how Hillsborough is able to do that, because property transfer tax for general law cities is set by state law and cannot be changed. And Hillsborough is a general law city, I believe, not a charter city. So if you're a charter city, you can set a higher rate and you go to the voters and you ask the voters to approve it. But for general law cities like us, it's $1.10, and it's split. 55 cents goes to the county and 55 cents goes to the city per thousand. So I don't know how Hillsborough is doing that. I'd have to do some digging. What we are discussing with the city council, and we're going to be launching a poll in the near future, is increasing our business license tax. Right now it's a flat tax of $100 for every business. So if you are a small mom and pop restaurant or dry cleaner or whatnot, or your Meta, Facebook Meta, the Apple Store, a car dealership, you pay $100 flat fee. So we're looking at some modest increases and tiering it, but again, like fairly modest tiering. So maybe $150 for the little guys and $250 or $300 for the medium-sized businesses, and maybe $750 or a little bit more for the big guys. That's what we're looking at right now for this election cycle.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question. I was looking at the zoning for downtown Burlingame, and it appears that the zoning for part of Howard on the north side of Howard, perhaps the height limit might be less than if you go to the south side of Howard. So I'm wondering, and maybe I'm incorrect in thinking that, but have we looked at maybe rezoning it so that it's kind of, I think it's all, I can't remember, but I thought it was like 7 stories on one side and 5 stories on the other. So I'm just wondering if we've looked at that, and is that a possibility of rezoning that area so that it's all uniform?
So I think what you're referring to is, the Howard mixed use zone has a 55-foot height limit. Then if you go further south, there's what's called the R4 incentive zone, which has a 75-foot height limit. This goes back to the downtown specific plan, where the thinking was that south of Howard would be a good zone for housing and should be incentivized. So it does have a higher height limit, including a higher by right limit. 75 is not by right, but it is a higher limit than what is in the downtown core. But those kinds of regulations are certainly up for discussion, should there be interest in looking at any of those.
Yeah, I was just thinking if there's projects that come on the Howard side, then maybe the additional stories above those units could be more affordable we get more affordable units, giving them the height limit. Thank you, Kevin.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. To our director, how many landlords did you talk to?
So we
Or the
do
team
know,
talked to? Yeah.
we had some landlords in the community meetings. We're happy to talk to any landlord who wants to. So in fact, the landlord who was in that first meeting and said she wanted to have units available at below market, we followed up with her because we wanted to see exactly what she was interested in. And so we have not talked to a whole lot, but should there be any, we would welcome the opportunity to talk to them.
I think if we're going to be looking at, policy and making these types of decisions, we really need to reach out more to the landlords and educate them about the information that's being discussed. So I do think the outreach needs to be better in that realm. It is an interesting, actually, concept. I know number 4 in our staff report on page 3 for private landlords to enter their units into the affordable housing numbers. I'm not sure if many landlords would be up to having their property managed by someone else, but maybe be much more open to working collaboratively with them. I do think that's actually a good incentive there, because I would think with a lot of the older stock units, many of them would probably fit into that category. The other thing is the mention of ADUs for a 10-year length, I think is too long. Also think that the subsidy shouldn't be given up front. If you're going to do it, I think it might be better to do it on a yearly basis and then do like a reimbursement each year rather than a long-term 10-year, because then the question becomes, well, what happens if someone wants to sell their house? Then does that restrict, future owners? But I do think, offering an incentive that you do, your yearly leases and then prove that it's the below market would be a good way to go. I just have a question of how would that be enforced? Do they check in, with staff each year, show the lease?
That's typically what Hillsborough does this, and that's how they're able to state convincingly to the state that their ADUs are satisfying low-income housing. They do a verification, and it's not so many that it's not something they can do it, and they do need to see proof of leases and payments and all of that. But that's the way they basically do an audit.
Okay. And do we have any data on Hillsborough at this point? Because it'd be interesting to look at that and see how many they're getting.
We could follow up with that because it is, as mentioned, that had been their approach in the past to satisfying their obligations. So they did develop a program that seems to work pretty well. I'll also just go back to the first question. I think the thought of allowing landlords to offer listings through the city's affordable housing list, it would not extend to management. So it's more, I think what the landlord had suggested, and which I think we kind of ran with, was she just said, how can I, these are the tenants I would like. So it would be more, and it's the same with our other units. So for example, at the Anson, those units are still managed by the property manager, but House Keys provides the tenants and then says here tenants that are, and then House Keys also does the audit. There is audit involved in ensuring that the tenants are still within the scope of the income category. And so that's taking the burden off of a landlord in both finding a tenant and also doing that auditing.
Okay, so then let's just say that was a possibility futuristically. Would those units then would be counted toward our RENA numbers, correct? Or not?
No, so that's where we get into the housing elements, kind of trying to do two things at once. One is it is very production oriented. So the regional housing needs allocation really focuses on producing new units. But then the housing element also is supposed to respond to the needs of the community. So we wouldn't get credit for towards the RENA, but ideally those are units that are going to be beneficial to the households that live there. So it's a program that would ideally have the benefits just on its own merits.
Well, maybe futuristically, it's worth a discussion with our legislators to see if that is something that could be changed and have those count toward our RENA numbers. Because I think you'd have more incentive in some ways to get that.
And I would expect, I do know a lot of communities have been looking at this naturally affordable housing issue. So I would guess the legislators have also been looking at it just because it is something that's on everyone's mind.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Pfaff.
Yes, I'm going to work backward first. So that is actually true. I think maybe it was funny. It was maybe a week after the goal setting session where the naturally affordable issue got brought up, and there were some problems with that as the legislation is currently. And I think it was Senator Becker. I did see an article that is definitely being new laws are being worked on to address this issue. So I guess in this case, we should really encourage him on this one. Back to our land use. Commissioner Camarado brought up the giving more height on the, I guess that would be the north side of Howard. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding our rules as they stand. I'm pretty sure you can add, without changing any zoning that we currently have on the housing, I'm pretty sure that any developer can add more height if they add the affordable unit. So you get I don't know what the proper term is, but you can get a floor or more even as it stands right now if they provide more affordable units. Is that correct?
Density bonus.
That is correct. And that may be also, it's interesting, the dynamic in that with the heights as they are now, there's an incentive to provide those affordable units in order to get more height. That would be considered either a concession or a waiver under state density bonus law. So there is actually an incentive and right now, and there is the ability to do that, provided that there are adequate affordable units.
Right. Okay. So that's great. And then finally, and I have to apologize because if you've written this somewhere, I in a very simplified form, I haven't been able to find it. I just do not understand if the production of your allocated, what you're supposed to produce, if you, let's say, because we've done a good job, we have reached or exceeded what they are telling us we need to do, our production. Do they keep on then, does your ratio change for 8 years later? Do they keep on saying, well, you did a great job this time, so you can do an even better job next time? Or do they then, how is this calculation done? Is it in our benefit if we are, because it is a resource and infrastructure issue as well? Is there some point in time where you get like, yeah, pat on the back, good job, we're not going to keep on cranking it up on you for this round? I don't understand how this works.
Sure. So cities are certainly not penalized for being successful. So if we do really well, it doesn't mean then the state says, well, since you did so well, you're going to have to do even better. They basically reset the methodology behind the allocations is changed every 8 years. So what we've seen in this current cycle is cities that tend to have good jobs and good schools and healthy economies are receiving larger proportions of the allocations. People may have different thoughts about that, but that is the methodology in this current cycle. So that's why Burlingame and other cities on the peninsula have fairly high allocations. Is the thinking is to provide housing close to those good jobs and ideally kind of match the housing and economy and jobs housing balance and all of that. But yeah, the state isn't looking to, they're neither looking at are there big tracts of available land, nor are they looking at lack of availability of land or past housing production. Where there is an incentive is that or there's a benefit is that we are allowed to roll over production from the prior cycle. So we do have a lot of units that we can roll over because they qualify for our housing production. So we're not being penalized. And in fact, we're being rewarded for that prior production because it's getting us that much further ahead in our obligations for this current round. If that makes sense. It's
not really. I know you're trying. I'm sorry, I have a block, but
yeah,
so you're saying
the methodology is confusing for sure.
Very confusing. So you're saying some that we have for number 5, can we get credit for them in 6 for some reason? That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So like all these projects you see under construction, provided they aren't completed before, this is getting into the weeds further, but let's just do it. Provided they're completed, they are not completed before June 30th of this year, we can roll them over to our next allocation. So if all 2,299 units that are in our pipeline right now are built, we get to apply that. We're already 70% there in terms of total number of units for our next cycle. And the next cycle after that, RENA 7, we don't know whether they'll change the methodology, but in the past, there has not been, like I said, cities are not punished for their success.
Okay, and then finally, it's just a comment, quick comment without an opinion. I am asked now because people who now, a planning commissioner, okay, I'm going to ask. So I have gotten comments about why don't we build on the Bayfront? And housing, yes. And so I was just curious because it has come up for many, many decades even. And a future council may decide that's what they want to do. And so seeing what we're looking at with possible office and life science development, I just was wondering if that came up in your input from people.
It came up more in the general plan. So this was a question we asked, and it is the perennial question. I think I've been doing work for Burlingame either as a staff or consultant for about 20 years now, and it goes all the way back 20 years and probably before that. And we ask it every few years. So the most recent time we asked was in the general plan. The thought was that this isn't the right time given there's not as many services and the transit isn't quite there in the bayfront yet. And then there was also concern about sea level rise. And it's one thing to have commercial development, which has more central management. And, should there be flooding, it's a little easier to do the management. Whereas if it's people's homes, that's something different. Now in the future, this is a perennial topic. It'll come back again. We didn't hear so much in the housing element outreach, but we did, like I said, in the general plan. Perhaps that's the reserve for the next cycle, should we need more sites? But that was the thinking when the general plan was updated, was to prioritize housing in the areas that already have good access to transit and services.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Commissioner C.
Yes, thank you. So I asked a question that's going to show my ignorance in the development industry, but recognizing that property values are higher or lower in different parts of our own city and as well as our neighboring cities, is there some type of a collaborative effort that's made with our neighboring cities and developers to try to reach, let's say, the extremely low or the very low categories of lower income housing? Or is it every city on their own needs to somehow address this breakdown?
So I think this concept has been floated from time to time, and I think it may have even been discussed as part of the methodology for this current housing element cycle. And I think what's come down is, as much as it's a great idea, then cities are afraid that they would be on the receiving end. So nobody is, whenever it's been put out there, there hasn't been a lot of support because exactly that. Somebody's afraid, well, am I going to be the one that ends up having to provide more units? So the end result is everybody kind of just looks after their own. It is an interesting idea, but it's to date has not really had takers. There may be others who are more familiar with those conversations that could chime in as well.
And I'll tell you, we had discussions at CCAG regarding this, about creating the sub-region, I believe is the term. And the sub-region would have allowed us to sit down with our neighbors and kind of negotiate what allocations we would each have. The vote went 18-1. I was the one in favor of the sub-region, and 18 were against it. So the whole idea is that we basically decided as a body to allow the allocation from ABAG instead of negotiating everything. And so this is what we came up with. So the answer is no. It is our number to deal with, and we can't work with other areas to try to come up with a regional number.
Oh, that's so interesting. It just seems like that would be a really good big picture way of addressing the need for the lower income housing. Is Councilmember Colson trying to add something to?
Go ahead, and we'll bring her on in a second.
Okay, I thought she was trying to say something to this.
I can add to it in a minute from some of the other work I'm doing.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry if I might have missed it. Did you say that ADUs are not counting towards our arena numbers?
They are.
No, they are. So
They are.
yes. So what we can do, so we count them all, and then the state has come up with a methodology, which is kind of great in that it assumes a certain affordability without verification, but they've done studies throughout the state to see what is the kind of economic profile of accessory dwelling units. So we're able to, I believe it's a 30-30-30-10 allocation of market rate, moderate, low, very low. We don't have to verify that, but we can use those assumptions. And then for our projecting, we look at a 4-year average of accessory dwelling units, and then we can put that into our arena and say that this is what we expect over the next 8 years based on our average. So we've had a real uptick in ADUs in the last couple of years, so that brings our averages up, and that helps us. And then we can claim future units and on the whole range of income categories.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Just to add to, there was an earlier discussion about what Hillsborough does. With my clients in Hillsborough who have built ADUs, there is a questionnaire that they have to answer in the application process. And part of the questioning is about whether the plans are to rent the ADU out and for how much, I believe even was on there, and who might be living in the ADU. And so it seems like it might be a thing that we could maybe tag onto our application process just to gather that data of what people plan to do with their ADUs. I generally find in Burlingame that my clients are more interested in generational, like multi-generational living, the potential to claim some additional FAR or lot coverage. It's just, of course, that's what the one of the rewards and benefits for adding an ADU. But because we're so tight on space in this city compared to maybe Hillsborough, or people are taking advantage of that. And it'd just be good to know what people are planning. I suggest it to every client now, just as, are you aware of it? These are things you can do. And I kind of think about what life cycle a client is in, and do they have young adult children who might be coming back from college, who might be working in the area and need housing, or do they have aging parents, or do they need an au pair, housing, or whatever it might be. And so it'd just be interesting to kind of gather data on what people are doing with their ADUs, other than trying to take advantage of the FAR and lot coverage bonuses.
Thank you. Yeah, we can follow up with Hillsborough, and because that does seem very helpful.
Yeah, and it's just a few questions. It's not like a really detailed questionnaire or anything like that. It's just they're trying to gather data too, obviously.
Thank you. That's a good one. Councilmember Colson, did you have something to add to the RENA conversation?
I do. I have other comments, but I'll just really quickly, since we're following up with Audrey, Commissioner, say there is also San Mateo County Home for All that includes all the county and all the different cities and a lot of agencies that are talking more broadly about housing. So that is one centralized area that we are working on it. And we also have the San Mateo County Housing and Community Development Committee, of which I sit on. I'm one of two council people who serve on that. And that committee allocates all the federal, state, and then county dollars to affordable housing projects throughout the county, and works to coordinate the efforts to make sure that sort of regionally we are trying to meet all of our numbers. It's a little hard for cities like Burlingame, which are wealthier, to qualify for a lot of those. And then just finally, we have HEART, the Housing Endowment Regional Trust that Michael sits on, or Councilman or Vice Mayor Brown-Riggs sits on. So there are a lot of, agencies that are working on this collaboratively for essentially the success of trying to build enough housing countywide.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Chair Schmid.
Thank you. I was going to go kind of a more practical approach on my question, and kind of in line with Commissioner Say. I feel like I drive through our city and see for rent signs all over the place. So I don't necessarily feel the same about housing crunch. I think it's housing use and who wants what where. I think that there's a ton of opportunities. And it feels like we struggle in tracking things, like tracking total rental inventory, like tracking our ADU use. I like Commissioner Say, I actually look at most of these projects that they're proposing ADUs, and they do look like FAR grabs rather than true rental units, because they're attached. It's like, oh, that's a family member. Well, that's just building a bigger house. And so it doesn't feel like then it's actually addressing the true issue that we're trying to accomplish in being able to provide more affordable and better use. It's just extended families. So I would love to see that we are tracking more data And I think that the suggestion of the ADU form is important. But same thing is we've got a ton of older inventory on El Camino Real that I think is being under-tracked and not necessarily being put forth as a more timely solution than making all of these new developments put in below market rate units. And I think that the opportunity of the naturally affordable incentive is a good one, because otherwise we really, with rent control and the other things that are being put in place, we're disincentivizing our smaller landlords who own multi-units in our town, who have older products that can't, don't want to afford to knock it down and then put 50 units. They've got a good 20 there, and they could be adding a lot of value to the kinds of renters that we keep talking about. So that was mine.
Thank you, Chair Schmidt. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wonder, just as a reminder to all of us, when we were creating the Rollins Road neighborhood, which, by the way, we still need to come up with a snappy name for, so that's a challenge to all of us collectively. But when we were doing that, the city council in particular, in developing the general plan, wanted to make sure there was as many affordable units as possible, though not so much as to make it impossible to redevelop. And we hired an economist and did it the right way and came up with a number. A long way of asking Director Gardner, because at the time we agreed we would come back and revisit this after development had started to occur to see whether that number might go up. I was struck as we looked over the major projects, Director Gardner, the one that's on El Camino at Truesdale is going to be a very, very large looking building. And I am sure more than a few of our neighbors would say, how come fewer than 10% of them are affordable? Of course, the answer is, well, deeply affordable needs more subsidy. We understand that. But the question is, can we do better? And my question for you, Director Gardner, is just to share with the wider group how we're going about thinking about that review, because we have talked about that in a smaller setting.
I do think it's timely to have the review, and in particular, we can look at the percentages that we have seen in projects, and the two on Rollins Road have exceeded what was required by the city, and I think that then is indicative that the market can most likely support something higher. The one on Truesdale and El Camino is a little different. I'll kind of explain how all that works. And
I'm not, let me not drill down on one particular project. I'm simply,
sure.
I just wanted the wider group to know that this question of, can we ask for more? We're beginning the process of trying to answer that question, right?
Yes, yeah. And I think it's worth noting that the low income category seems to work well with the state density bonus. So that's something we can factor in, and that's how we are able to get more of those units at that category. The other thing that's important to just mention to the community as they look at, why are these percentages lower? The percentages start by being based off of the base density, and then the size of the bonus is larger depending on the income level that's being accommodated. So
right.
For the low income or very low, there's a bigger bonus, and then those bonus units are not counted towards that percentage. So what we can do is kind of do an audit and look at what are the percentages we're seeing based on both the base densities as well as the built densities, and come up with maybe better feedback for a feasibility study to see where we can increase those percentages.
Okay, and given time, I'm going to make three very rapid comments and then I'll probably be done. One, I did see Senator Becker a couple of nights ago at a charity event. He pulled me aside to specifically reiterate his interest in working on arena fix, so that if you protect or preserve de facto affordable housing, that should count. So I think that the door is open and we need to help create that kind of language. Two, the reason, this is a more philosophical point, but the reason our city is ahead of RENA in terms of housing goals is because the city council and all of us as a community agreed we wanted to have more housing, that we wanted to make sure our community, which has always been very diverse economically, if not always racially, that it stayed diverse economically and we could see what was happening. So, you know, I know a lot of people want to use RENA as the defense and we have to do this because of RENA. I look at it as it's something we are doing because we wanted to do it. And I'm proud of us for that. Like, I think that's why we're ahead, because we thought it was the right thing to do for our city. So, I mean, you know, we always want to make sure it's well planned and it looks good and it fits. But, you know, we're doing this because we think this is the right thing for our city. And I'm proud of that work. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. The last thing was I completely endorse Councilwoman Beach's point about, and your promise to look at affordable housing flows, Director Gardner, because, and I think we should revisit this set of questions with maybe even this wider group when we have that sense of numbers, because I actually think that cash flow is going to be significant. And then we should have a really considered conversation about how to deploy it most usefully, given all of these different housing goals. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Gall, I'm going to hold off for just a moment. I'm looking at the clock and we're kind of starting to run up against our ending. So I really do want to open it to the public. So the question for you, Commissioner Gall, is yours a question or a comment? Because if it's a comment, I'd want to wait till after public comment.
It's a comment.
Okay, so let's do that then. Let's I see you too, Councilmember Colson. Okay, so let's open it to the members of the public to see if we have any members so we can get that, and we have a little time for our final comments before noon. Mr. Hearn, if you have any public comment?
Yeah, I don't see anybody raising their hands, and there's no emails submitted on this subject.
Very good. Okay, good. I'm glad. So now, Mr. Commissioner Gall, you have all the time in the world.
Well, or 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I'm surprised that there's nobody in the public that's stuck with us through all this. But I'll make it quick. But you know, when we were developing the general plan and rezoning things, and we were talking about the North Rollins Road area, we talked about kind of creating a neighborhood, and we sort of said, well, that will sort of develop on its own. But I've made the comment on a number of the housing projects. I think the housing is all great and we're getting where we need to be, but I can't stress enough that we need to have more than just the housing in those places. We have to have a reason for people to not just live there and then leave and go somewhere else. If we're going to create a neighborhood, you know, we have to have things. And you know, I spend a lot of time, believe it or not, up around the ballpark in San Francisco, and there are a few places, there's housing all over the place around there. And on the ground level, they have a lot of retail. Like there's this one store, Gus's Market, and it's a fantastic store. And people shop there that live upstairs, and they kind of stay in that neighborhood. A lot of the housing we're putting in is around some of those areas, but not in some of those retail areas, but not in the North Rollins Road area. So I'm not talking about changing zoning or anything, but I continue to encourage people when they're doing these housing developments to give people some open space. And you know, you could put a bank down there, you could put a coffee shop, you could put a restaurant, you could put anything, but it gives people a reason to live there. We talked about it in the project that's being developed at the Beacons lot, or the Beacons moving place that's going to be torn down. And yeah, there's the Panera Bread and everything nearby, but if we can encourage them to have a reason for people to be there, you're going to create these neighborhoods, and you're going to create a more dynamic housing element than just a place to live and leave. So that's just a general comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councilmember Colson.
Okay, thank you. So I really want to emphasize that we are putting together a specific plan for North Rollins Road, and it does include walkability, bikeability, transit, other important elements that do make it a neighborhood. And I like building on Commissioner Gall's comments, which is also thinking about what the composition of the retail and the lower units are going to look like, because if there's no reason to bike or no reason to walk, no one will. So we do need to integrate that. And I'm hoping and feeling like the developers are trying to do a good job, and I appreciate the Planning Commission keeping an eye on that. I also just want to say that I think one of the reasons maybe there's not very many members of the public today here is because our staff has been doing pretty good outreach, and they've been really trying to get in touch with and talk to people. So possibly some people feel that they've been heard, but we can always take more public outreach. So I do hope that our residents will continue to be engaged on this. And the overall, I'm very proud of the work we're doing on both the general plan, then the housing element and how that's fed into it. And I just think these programs, I really loved hearing from the public, and it's a very small sample size. So maybe we could get a larger sample size on some of those comments back on the different programs that we're talking about. And I look forward to, maybe the working group or something that we can kind of vet out and see what's feasible, what's not feasible. But the one thing I'm hearing, two things really strongly from our community. One is opportunities to purchase homes in Burlingame and figure out how to buy, which in order to be entry level or affordable will have to be multifamily residential or something else, whether it's SB9 units or something. And then the second thing is for people with special needs and abilities, and making sure that we accommodate those those members of our community, either through ADUs or through our helping people like Gate Path with their development. So I think if we can keep those two in focus, and maybe when we drill down into our data as numbers are getting presented in the next year and year after, if we can look at how many units are being set aside, not just by income, but also if there are unique things like seniors and special needs, that would be really helpful.
Thank you. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you for the great conversation. I'll just make a couple quick comments. I do think, first of all, fantastic presentation today, Kevin. I think a priority for me, from my perspective, would be really looking at those affordable housing funds that we've accumulated and deploying them and getting them back invested into the community. So I'm really glad we're going to look at that, to to Vice Mayor Brownrigg's comment as well. And we talked in the past about making sure, if we can partner with nonprofit developers that are trying to do a project, or market rate developers, but getting those deeper levels of affordability using those funds, I think that would be a great use of funds. We've also talked in the past about setting a small portion of the of those funds aside for emergency rental assistance for our community. And I think that could be an important thing to just not forget, that we have that policy discussion, how we could maybe put that into action in the coming months. I do think a priority for preservation of existing naturally affordable units could be really powerful. I love the idea of prioritizing help for some of those units by maybe encouraging with seismic retrofitting to make sure those units are safer. Those units really worry me, and we've got so many that are soft story in our community. And someday the earthquake's going to hit, and we need to address that. And it could be a brilliant, elegant solution to help create incentives for owners to hang on to those units so they don't get redeveloped, but make sure that they're safe. So that would be, I think, a deployment of funds, if that's feasible, something we should look into. I love the idea of energy efficiency incentives too, but I think there's going to be lots of those energy efficiency incentives coming from the federal government or even the state government. So I would prioritize the seismic retrofitting exploration first. And then I do agree that there is a need for more affordable home ownership opportunities in Burlingame. It'd be interesting to learn what we can from the Anson development and how we strike that balance. We don't want to go to the other extreme and convert all our multi-unit to condos or anything like that, but we've got to figure out where are some opportunities that we can continue to have those affordable home ownership opportunities for our community. Because part of equity too is making sure that people at all income levels can access the magnificent quality of life and the school system and everything we do have in Burlingame. And then finally, eager, once we get through Rollins Road, which is a huge work effort, but To your point, Mr. Gardner, the Broadway specific plan is coming up next. So as we have to move into Arena 6 and we look at where those opportunities are, it will be interesting to see what the community wants from Broadway. And there'll be a balance we have to strike there too, as far as keeping do we want to keep it sort of a local rootsy? Do we want to allow more development, more housing, more density? Especially as we get Broadway grade separated, it will be interesting to see what the community says they want. And what we decide as a community we want for Broadway. So looking forward to that project next. My final comment is, wow, as far as results, to see that the current units in the pipeline are at like 16% affordable and the ones projected in the next phase are already like 20% affordability, we must have been doing something right. So the more we can get deeper levels of affordability to maybe use those affordable housing funds to help with that or other creative solutions. But it certainly seems like we're on a really good track. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Beach. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Just a quick observation. Councilman Colson and I met with the school board, several weeks ago. And this is an indirect answer to the Bayside question, but one of the things that became more clear to us is the number of rules that apply to schools with respect to where housing goes, and especially safe routes to schools, and some of the rules that they have to live by. So all of us on the city side need to be mindful of, at least mindful of the impact on schools and the practicality of getting kids into the school. So just something to think about as we look at developments in the future.
Thank you. And so I have a couple comments that I want to share. We look at the RENA numbers, I think we're doing very well, but when it comes to the very low, that is our real challenge. And finding a way to find those units, to create those units is going to be what we're going to really have to be creative. And that's where we're going to need to use the residential impact fees to leverage with new developments or to create those new units, because as we looked at, there's a lot of service employees who are in that category who cannot afford to live here. And some of them work for the city and some of them work for the school district. And I think it's important that we find a way to identify these units. So with that, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think this is a great presentation. I'm very proud of all the work that we have done in the city and with our community development department and my colleagues and the planning commission. I think that we are moving in the right direction. We are creating more housing, which creates more affordable housing. Unless anybody has any final comments, I think we are ready to adjourn. Mr. Director, do you have any final comments for us?
The one last item, which I would like to just put out here is the use of the commercial linkage fees. We are starting to accumulate them. I can provide those totals, but there's a couple of routes and it's up to the mayor and the council. But one option would be a council subcommittee to come up with what we really need are some policies, and there will never be as many funds as there are great ways to use them. So we would want to come up with a framework. We already have some developments asking our funds available, and we'd rather have some policies in place. And then in terms of Broadway specific plan, we will have another community advisory committee. So we will be, that's coming around the bend fairly quickly, and we'll be in touch with both the council and commission to have some representatives on that.
Thank you. I think the subcommittee is a good idea. I'll work with you and the city manager to come up with a future plan. So Councilmember Colson, did you have any thoughts on what the director just said?
I think a subcommittee is the easiest way to work on this and probably the most efficient, and then report out in probably we just have to think about the timing on how to report out on that. It could be a study session, but more likely it would need more time than that. So, and those are all my thoughts.
Very good. Thank you. No, I totally agree. Okay, colleagues, anybody else? We're ready to wrap it up. I think appreciate everybody taking their Saturday to be here today. I think those were great presentations. And with that, you guys go and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.